Why you guys?
Yeah, very nice, beautiful.
What do you think you do?
In his yeshiva, they have a few more guys who did it. Here's more guys.
Beautiful.
There's no color on that side.
You have to sit down, or else the camera will be blocked.
This is Buffalo Vahagalit.
We're on? Okay.
May I have a fork?
First of all, we'll start with l'chaim. L'chaim, everyone should have some l'chaim. Well, we're about to also. L'chaim, l'chaim.
Make sure.
It was a Niggunim that was composed for Gimmel Tammuz when the Previous Rebbe was released from prison on this day, and we'll talk more about it later. So one of the Chassidim composed the Niggunim to celebrate the liberation of the Previous Rebbe. L'chaim, l'chaim. Before we talk about Gimmel Tammuz itself, the significance of this day, how we're supposed to relate to it, how it's supposed to affect us, first want to talk about what's the significance of a Farbrengen. We know that Chassidim, in addition to learning Chassidis, they also Farbrengen. And very often, the same things that they learn when they're sitting in a class and learning a Maamar Chassidis, they'll talk about the same things in a Farbrengen. So what is the Farbrengen? What does it add on to just learning? So if you think about it, Farbrengen has 3 ingredients. Maybe more than 3, but at least 3. Number 1, the sitting together in a brotherly way. The famous story of the Alter Rebbe. He was sitting at a Farbrengen with his colleagues. They were all disciples of the Maggid of Mizrich. And there was a Yid there who was crying and begging them to give him a bracha. Apparently he had a very serious problem, a health problem, whatever it was. And these were great tzaddikim, so he was asking them, please give me a bracha. And because they were all so humble, and they felt, who are we? We're not the Rebbe. The Rebbe can give a bracha. We're just ordinary people. So they declined. They said, no, we're not qualified to give a bracha. And he kept on persisting, and the louder he would cry out to them, they started singing louder and louder to drown out his pleas. At that point, the Alter Rebbe stood up, even though he was probably the youngest of all the disciples of the Maggid, and he said, don't you remember a note descended from heaven that said that what a Chassidic, good brotherly Farbrengen can accomplish, even Malach Michael, the angel Michael, cannot accomplish. And when they heard that, they changed their whole demeanor and they gave him a bracha. What does that mean? That when Yidden sit together in a state of achdus, when you learn Torah, there's always a hierarchy. There's the teacher, there's the student, there's the better student and inferior student. There's a lot of different divisions, and sometimes those divisions affect the unity of the people who are learning. When your focus is on the intellect, everyone's intellect is on a different level, and there can be friction, there could be division. But when you're sitting at a Farbrengen, unless it's the Farbrengen of the Rebbe, of course, that's a different story. But when Chassidim sit together, they sit together as one group, and they're squeezed together. They're maybe not very comfortable physically, but there's a certain feeling of achdus, of unity, and all the differences fade away. There's a Gemara in Brachas that talks about demons. That sometimes you find that in the Beis HaMikdash, where the students are learning Torah, and there's not a big crowd, but somehow their clothing starts to wear off as if they were squeezed together and rubbing their clothing against someone else's clothing. But the question was, there was no one there. There was just a sparse attendance, and yet they felt crowded. And the answer is, those are the demons. What does that mean? The Rambam didn't believe in demons. We're not going to go into that, whether we follow the Rambam or not, but certainly there must be a deeper meaning over there. The deeper meaning, I think, is when Yidden sit together intellectually and are studying, inevitably there's going to be a separation, there's going to be an argument and a division. Everyone is on a different level. Those are the demons that separate. So how do you get rid of those demons? And the answer is through a Farbrengen. Farbrengen takes away the separation, the hierarchy, and we're all equal, and we're all equally trying to become better people, better Yidden, better Chassidim, and whatever errors we had before fades away. There's a mission in Pirkei Avos that says that in the Beit HaMikdash there were miracles. One of the miracles was, in the Beit HaMikdash, Eimdim Tzfufim, they would stand crowded, squeezed in like sardines. And I like to joke about that sardines, I once overheard them say that we're as crowded as it is in the Beit HaMikdash or in 770 Eastern Parkway, one or the other, which is really the same thing, Beit HaMikdash Miyad, Beit HaBeinu Bavel. At any rate, there was plenty of room for everyone. Then the Mishnah says another miracle, even a bigger miracle, that in Yerushalayim no one ever complained that it's tight, it's not enough space for me to sleep in Yerushalayim. What's the big deal? If you have already a miracle in the Beit HaMikdash, or mamish a miracle, contrary to nature, here you have people squeezed together, there's not a space, you can't put anything in, and all of a sudden everyone bows down. So you have to then say, well, in Yerushalayim, no one complained about how crowded it was. So there's a half serious and half joking way of answering that when Jews, the miracles were not that it wasn't crowded, it was crowded, but Jews didn't complain. That's the biggest miracle. But I think there's a deeper understanding. In the Beit HaMikdash, where the Shekhinah was totally revealed, obviously space didn't mean anything. You're in a different world. But when you come into Yerushalayim, and it's a normal city, like any other city, and it's crowded, and you didn't feel how crowded it was because you felt such a feeling of achdus. In the Rebbe's Kapitel, we have Ir Shechubra La Yachtav. It's a city that unites everyone. So that's even in a way a greater miracle. In the Beit HaMikdash, there's no chiddush. There's no novelty that in 770, by the way, the Rebbe's Farbrengen, that everyone was squeezed together and it was tremendous tightness, and everyone felt comfortable because they were in presence of the Rebbe. I remember we were at a Farbrengen with a group from Buffalo, and a Chassid from Buffalo, Rabbi Charlie Schumann, was there, and the Rebbe apologized for him for the crowd. It was pushing and crowded, and the Rebbe said, but this is the real, what was the word he used? What?
Order.
The real order. This is the real order. The real order is where you're crowded in and you don't even feel you're crowded. That's the miracle. That's what a Farbrengen is. A Farbrengen is where everyone sits together and they can be crowded together and everyone feels comfortable with one another. We know that the Rebbe always talks about Machda Eretz Yisrael. We have to transform where we live in Eretz Yisrael. How do you do that? When you live your life in accordance with Hashem's will, you can be in your business, you can be wherever you are, and you turn it into Eretz Yisrael. What is Eretz Yisrael? It's a land that has a desire to do God's will. And when you conform to Hashem's will, when you do Torah and Mitzvot, you are recreating Eretz Yisrael wherever you are. How do you recreate the Beit HaMikdash? The answer is, Gemara says, Ein l'kadosh baruch hu be'ilame l'dalet amashal halacha b'lvad. When you learn halacha, you're recreating the Aron, the Ark, and the Beit HaMikdash. So my question is, how do you recreate Yerushalayim? Because before they built the Beit HaMikdash, they had to sanctify Yerushalayim. So how do you have to have Yerushalayim? You can't just have a Beit HaMikdash. You have to have a city where people live and people work. How do you recreate Yerushalayim? And I think the answer is through a Farbrengen. A Farbrengen is recreating the idea that you're living in a normal city, everyone has their place, and it gets crowded, and it's not a miracle that that everyone has plenty of room. No, you don't have plenty of room. And in spite of that, you have this feeling of brotherhood that you're one. That's one of the qualities of a Farbrengen, the achdus that it creates, which you don't have when you're not when you say the same things, but not in the context of a Farbrengen. A second thing about a Farbrengen is Niggunim. We sing a Niggun. You don't just talk endlessly, no matter how interesting someone, a mashpia, could be. He stops and he says, Zaga Niggun. What's the Niggun accomplish? So the Friedrich Rebbe said, it says there's a Maamar Chazal, Kail Me'er HaKavana, that your voice arouses kavana, arouses concentration. So the Friedrich Rebbe applies that to negina, to singing, a Chassidic melody. When you sing a melody, it arouses kavana. What does the word kavana mean? The simple translation is concentration, intention, focus. But the Friedrich Rebbe says it's connected to a word, an Aramaic word by Daniel, who was davening, v'chavein le psichin, and the windows were open. So the word chavein, which is same as kavana, means a window. That when you sing a niggun, it opens up a window. What kind of window? Unfortunately, sometimes, no matter how hard you try to open up your heart, there's a barrier, a blockage between your mind and your heart. You know the truth, you know what's emes, and it doesn't affect your heart. your feelings are still cold and you're desensitized. So you have to do something, opening up a window. You can't get rid of the wall because there's a difference between seichel and midas, but you have to open a window so your mind, what you understand, is not just something in your head, it's not just cerebral, it affects your emotions, it opens up your emotions.
Why do you say Niggunim?
Okay, but this is not a test.
No, it's not. It's in general.
That's a good question. That's for another time. But we need, the niggin is not just something that you like to do because music is enjoyable, but the niggin allows you to take what was spoken and to internalize it. That it should be dvarim hayetzim min halev, the words that emanate from the heart, nichnasim el halev, enter the heart. Words that don't come from the heart don't penetrate into anyone else's heart. So how do you get your heart to open up? Words alone don't suffice. Sometimes you need a melody, and a Chassidic melody in particular. Why? Because a Chassidic melody composed by holy people, sung by Chassidim in a spiritual context, touches your neshama. It touches your soul. So that's the second element of a Farbrengen. And the third element of a Farbrengen is l'chaim. We say l'chaim, and we say l'chaim specifically over an alcoholic beverage. Now, Judaism does not believe in overly engaging and indulging in drinking, but it doesn't eschew drinking. It doesn't say that drinking is wrong and you can never drink. On Shabbos we drink wine, and Yom Tov we drink wine, and Purim, on Pesach we drink 4 cups of wine, and Purim we drink a lot more. And occasionally we go a little bit beyond, on Purim we go a little bit beyond the norm, maybe a little bit more than a little beyond the norm in some cases. But Judaism does not shun alcohol, but only when it's in the context of a Farbrengen. It's like I once heard the mashal that if you take a seed, very strong negative value, it causes you to lose your seichel, your intellect, and you can do things that are improper. And that's why the Rebbe strongly denounced people who drink, people under 40. I'm slightly over 40, but people over. But people under 40, the Rebbe said, should not drink, say l'chaim, more than 4 times. And if the 4 times cause them to lose their mind, they should even shun the 4 times. People over 40, the doctor will tell them not to drink, or they won't want to drink, but they're a little bit more responsible. But nevertheless, by a Farbrengen, we do drink, we do say l'chaim over a little bit of wine or vodka or other type of alcoholic beverage. What's the reason for that? And the answer, I think, is sometimes even the niggin doesn't help. The niggin is trying to open up a window, and there's a blockage. What is the blockage? Your nefesh habamis, your animal soul, is a blockage. So you have to bribe the animal soul, get the animal soul to be happy. The animal soul is happy because you gave it some alcohol. Meanwhile, while the animal soul is happy, it's not standing in the way of us being happy for the spiritual reason. That's a mashal, a parable given by the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov said there was once a person in captivity, and they made sure that this person should be miserable. And once he got a letter from his father, and it was the greatest source of joy. He wanted to dance and sing, but as soon as he would start dancing and singing, they would attack him and not allow him. So what did he do? He somehow found some liquor, and he gave it to them, and he got them drunk, and they were all singing and dancing. So he started singing and dancing. They're dancing because they're drunk, and he's dancing because he had a meeting. He got a letter from his father. Same thing by a Farbrengen. What is a Farbrengen? We're getting a letter. We're trying to communicate with our Father. Our Father in heaven, the Rebbe who's our Father. We're trying to create a relationship, and our animal soul gets in the way. The animal soul wants to eat, it wants to sleep, it wants to indulge in things that have nothing to do with our relationship with our Father. So what do? We bribe the animal soul, we get it to be a little bit happy, and once the animal soul is no longer disturbing us, we could experience the greatest spiritual feeling of unity with one Jew and another, with Hashem and with us and Hashem, and so on and so forth. So those are the 3 prongs of a Farbrengen. The fact that we're sitting together, but not as a teacher and a student or an intellectual argument. We're sitting together as brothers, and we sing a Niggun, a Chassidic Niggun, a warm Niggun, and we also say L'chaim. All these three elements take away all the obstacles, and it enables us to be receptive to whatever else we're going to be talking about tonight. L'chaim, L'chaim. A Niggun. Ready, yeah. Da na 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 yeah. Da la da da ya da 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 ya da ya da ma la da da ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da ma la da ya da ya da 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 ya da da ma la da da la da 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 ya da 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 ya la da ya da ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da da la da ya ya da ya ya da da la da ya ya da ya da ya da da L'chaim, L'chaim. Everyone knows what happened on Gimmel Tammuz, that we were denied the ability to see and hear the Rebbe. But Chassidim, myself included, have a hard time understanding what exactly we should feel on this day. Is it a happy day, a sad day? What is it? On one hand, Gimmel Tammuz is a very positive and happy day. It's the day that Previous Rebbe, the Previous Rebbe, was released from prison and released from a death sentence. That was the greatest miracle, that Stalin, Yamach Shemai, should buckle under the pressure and to let the Previous Rebbe go. True, he wasn't yet fully liberated until Yud Beis Tammuz, Yud Beis Yud Gimmel Tammuz. But nevertheless, the greatest threat to his life was averted. And it was Aschalta the Geula, as the Rebbe would refer to it. It's the beginning of his liberation. And the Rebbe celebrated Gimmel Tammuz. And if the Rebbe celebrated it, nothing could change. It's a very, very joyous time. At the same time, even though we can't hear or see the Rebbe, we know and we've been told, and we see this in our own lives, that the Rebbe is very much alive. No matter how different Chassidim interpret it different ways, one thing is clear, that everyone agrees that the Rebbe is still a Rebbe. There's no question about it. And the Rebbe is still performing miracles. And the Rebbe is affecting our lives dramatically. And Chabad is growing exponentially. So it's a source of great joy. And on the other hand, Gimmel Tammuz is a day that leads to some type of sadness. We can't see or hear the Rebbe. And as much as the Rebbe is still guiding us and still helping us and still present in our lives, it's not something that we could see physically. And especially the older group, people who are around before Gimmel Tammuz, sorely miss the ability to hear and see the Rebbe. Those who were born later maybe don't have that same feeling. But of course, even they would want to be able to hear and see the Rebbe, which they will imminently with the coming of Moshiach. But still, it's one could look at it as a sad day. If you look at the Hayom Yom of Gimmel Tammuz, what is the Hayom Yom? My grandfather said, that's the Rebbe Marash, a Jewish groan, which God forbid arises from physical misfortune, is also a great teshuvah. How much more so then is a groan arising from spiritual distress, a lofty and effective teshuvah. The groan pulls him out of the depths of evil and places him on a firm footing in the realm of good. The Rebbe talks about groaning in Hayom Yom. Nothing that the Yom Yom is by accident. So there's a part of us that's groaning, that's feeling really very, very disturbed that we can't hear and see the Rebbe. And even though the Rebbe himself alluded to this period and used the analogy of the sun and the moon, that when the sun gets closer to the moon, you see less of the moon. We were just learning in Hilchos Kiddush HaChedesh, when the moon and the sun come together, there's no moon. You don't see the moon. Because there's a greater closeness, that we're actually closer to the Rebbe than ever before, to the Rebbe's essence, our essence to the Rebbe's essence. That's very true. But we're human beings. We're down-to-earth people. We're creatures of physicality, and we want to hear and see the Rebbe, and that we're going to have with the imminent coming of Moshiach. That we'll have the etzem, and we'll have also the essence, and we'll also have the physical ability to hear and see the Rebbe. But meanwhile, we don't have that, so that's a reason to make this a little bit of a not such a happy time. And the answer is that the Rebbe already anticipated this. And the Rebbe told us, the Rebbe would talk about Moshiach, and he would say, we're already seeing, and I think it's Parshas Mishpatim of Tavshin and Beis, we're already seeing the beginning and the sample of the future, where the nations are getting rid of their weapons, and we're seeing the beginning of Geula on one hand, and in the same Sikha the Rebbe says, but Ad Mosai, we can't tolerate the fact that we're still in Golus. And I think it's in that same Sikha, but I didn't check it beforehand, but the Rebbe says, how could you have both things happening? You're excited about the Geula is right in front of us, and at the other hand, you're crying out, Ad Mosai, how much longer? How we can't tolerate the Golus? The Rebbe says a Jew is connected to Hashem, who has the capability of uniting opposites. We can do the opposite. We can be happy on one hand, and we could be, I don't want to use the word depressed, but we could be, in a certain sense, shattered by virtue of the fact that we don't have Moshiach. And the last Maamar, the last discourse that the Rebbe actually distributed to people a few weeks before he suffered his stroke, the Maamar of Veatah Tetzaveh, the Rebbe talks about how the deepest part of Golus is not when Jews were suffering. As bad as that was, the worst part of it is that we're not suffering, but we don't have the redemption. We're living in a world of 49, and the 50th level is elusive. And that's what shatters us. Chassidism, we're crushed. But that crushing is what will bring the geula, will bring the final redemption. But on one hand, we're crushed. On the other hand, we're filled with Bitachon, with trust that this is the end of Golus, and we're soon going to be meeting the Rebbe who will take us out of Golus and build the Beit HaMikdash and gather all the Jews together. So it's not an easy day to define, but part of its difficulty is that it combines opposites. And that itself, the idea of combining opposites, means that it comes from a higher source. The Rebbe always, in so many Maamorim of the Rebbe always talks about how there's two different dynamic forces, and the power that unites them, it comes from a higher source. Well, that means that we're connecting to a much higher source. L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim. A lot of l'chaim. Rabbi Munitz would always tell us that we should not say, give me a little l'chaim. You should ask for a lot of l'chaim. A little vodka. A lot of l'chaim. What?
Rabbi Posner.
Rabbi Posner from Pittsburgh.
He didn't like when someone asked for a little l'chaim.
Right, we don't want a little, we want a lot of l'chaim. And we want not just l'chaim the way we have it today, we want chaim nitzchim, we want eternal life. That's the only true chaim. Yeah. No, another Niggunim. Are you sure? Ma'aseh Yadeinu Kainen Aleinu, Ma'aseh Yadeinu Kainen Aleinu, Ma'aseh Yadeinu Kainen Aleinu, Ma'aseh Yadeinu Kainen Aleinu. Ay 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 la 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 ma la la ma la 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 la. Ay 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 la 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 la. Oh la 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 la. Nismecha b'chol yameinu. Ranenu. Nismecha b'chol yameinu. Yira'el avadecha ba'alecha. Adar chal b'neihem. Inayam Hashem Elokeinu Aleinu. Ma'aseh Yadeinu Kainen Aleinu, Ma'aseh Yadeinu Kainen Aleinu, Ma'aseh Yadeinu Kainen Aleinu, Ma'aseh Yadeinu Kainen Aleinu. Ya 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 na 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 L'chaim, l'chaim. The Rebbe would refer to Gimmel Tammuz, as I mentioned before, as a schal to the Geula, the beginning of the redemption. The beginning of the redemption of the previous Rebbe. So what happens now that Gimmel Tammuz turned into a time where we talk about how we can't see or hear the Rebbe anymore. But everything the Rebbe said is Kayim La'ad, doesn't cease, doesn't lose its power because something else happened on that day. The Rebbe also connected Gimmel Tammuz, the day of the liberation of the previous Rebbe, to the other historical event of Gimmel Tammuz, the one mentioned in the Tanakh, Sefer Yeshua, where Yeshua stopped the sun, Shemesh Begivin Daim. He was fighting a battle, and the sun was about to set, and he stopped the sun from setting. And many Chassidim have taken that to mean that on Gimmel Tammuz the sun didn't set. That in spite of what happened in Gimmel Tammuz, that was which was reported in the media. The media is sheker. In general, the media is sheker, but here it was doubly sheker because what they reported had nothing to do with reality. So let's talk a little bit about reality. The Medrash tells us that when Yeshua, how did he stop the sun? How did he stop the sun from setting? So it says he took a Sefer Torah, in one place it says Chumash Devarim, and with that he stopped the sun. If Yeshua was going to perform a miracle, why did he need a Sefer of Torah? Why did he need Chumash Devarim? He could have just said, I have the power, the Eibishter gave me a power, the Tzaddikim have power, they could control Teva, they can control nature, and that he decreed that the sun should stop setting. But he did it with Torah. Why did he do it with Torah? Because Torah, the Yerushalmi, quoted very often by the Rebbe, states that Torah is a balabasa Welt. Torah is in control of nature. And the famous example given is that if the Bezdin, the courts, the Jewish courts, decide to declare a leap year, biological changes in a person that are dependent on a certain age are reversed because the calendar is now reversed. Because where does that power come from? It comes to the power, the Jewish people have the power to alter nature. That's why in Yontif, Chodesh and Yontif, we say, Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. We don't say Mekadesh Hazmanim. On Shabbos, we say Mekadesh HaShabbos. Why do we say Mekadesh HaShabbos on Shabbos? Because we don't make Shabbos holy. Shabbos Mekadesh v'kaima. The Gemara says, Shabbos is holy from the very beginning. Whether we keep Shabbos or not, we don't make Shabbos holy. Although we add to Shabbos holiness, but that's a separate subject. But when it comes to Yontif, we make Yontif holy. We have the power, through our representatives in the Sanhedrin, to change the status of a weekday and turn it into a holy day. That's the power that a Jew has with Torah. And that's what Yeshua was trying to show. How am I changing the nature of the sun and the moon, and to stop it from setting? It's the power of Torah. Torah is a balabasa Welt. So what does it have to do with Gimmel Tammuz? The Gemara says in Tainus, a very famous Gemara, the Rebbe quoted it very many times, Yankov Avinu loy mes. Yaakov, our father, did not die. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean he didn't die? They buried him, they entombed him, they embalmed him, they eulogized him. And what does the Gemara answer? The Gemara doesn't answer to the question. The Gemara says there's a pasuk. There's a pasuk in the Torah that implies that Jacob will be around at the time of the Geula. He must be alive. 1 second. The doctors, tested his heart, and there's no heartbeat, there was no breathing. All the signs of death appeared by Yaakov, and there's a pasuk that says that Yaakov was going to be around. That means he didn't die. Who do you believe? You believe your eyes, your ears, your senses, or do you believe a pasuk in Chumash or in Tanakh? So there's a famous Baal Musar, I forgot his name, one of the big Bali Musar. This is not even a Chassidic hergish. This is a Baal Musar says this. Someone who just bases it on simple understanding of Torah. That if you see something, let's give an example. Let's say someone tells you something that so-and-so is alive, or someone's dead. That's a better example. And then you see the person walking into your house. Who do you believe? The person who tells you he's dead, a very reliable person, or what your eyes see? Obviously, you follow what your eyes see. Obviously. But what happens if your eyes see someone who walks into your house and seems to be alive, but the Torah tells you he's dead? Or I like to use the reverse example. Someone tells you someone is dead. You saw them burying this person. You saw them putting the body in the ground. And the Torah tells you that the person is alive. Who do you believe? The answer is you believe the Torah, not what your eyes see. And even in modern times, they know that vision doesn't prove anything conclusively, because people have all sorts of ideas what they think they saw, which might not turn out to be true. How many people see UFOs turn out to be nonsense? So what is Yeshua doing? He's taking the Torah and saying the Torah has the power to alter nature. And this is a very powerful lesson that we learn from Gimmel Tammuz, that when it comes to Yiddishkeit, we have to realize that what's really true in this world is Yiddishkeit, this Torah and Mitzvot. Everything else is true to the extent that it conforms with Torah and Mitzvot. If it conforms to the Torah and Mitzvot, then yes, it's true. But if it doesn't conform to Torah and Mitzvot, then it has no validity, it has no substance, it has no reality. Because Torah is the true reality of the world. How did Hashem create the world? He created the world with a blueprint of Torah. So if it doesn't exist in Torah, it doesn't exist in the world. So if Torah says this person is alive, they could have buried him 1,000 times, they could have eulogized him 1,000,000 times, he's still alive.
Why would they bury him?
Oh, very good question. Why did they bury him? So the Rashi says, because nidma lahem, it appeared to them, they were still in a state of golus. In golus, we see reality differently. We see a distorted form of reality, and we have to deal with that reality, even the distorted reality. The Rebbe himself explains that in the Parshas Yechi, by which chelik I don't remember. By Yaakov, in Parshas Vayechi, which is chelik of L'kut Sichos, I don't remember. But anyhow, the Rebbe explains that there are two realities. There's a reality that we see, and the Torah says we have to deal with that reality because that's the reality that we live with, and we have to refine it and elevate it. And there's a true reality. And when we finish Avedas Habirurim, the Rebbe says, when we finish the whole process of refining the world, which the Rebbe said we already accomplished, we already finished that, then we graduate to the higher level of reality, the reality of Torah. So what is Gimmel Tammuz? Gimmel Tammuz, at least the way I see it, is the day that we graduate into a higher reality of realizing that not only knowing the truth, that the true reality is the true reality of Torah, but being able to translate that into our own lives. That anytime we have a conflict between our lives and what the Torah tells us. So in the olden days, we used to say, one second, Torah tells us we have to do that. We have to not work on Shabbos. My business depends on working on Shabbos. So what am I supposed to do? So many Jews, unfortunately, when the Jews came to America, there was no Social Security, there was no government handouts. You were destitute if you didn't work on Shabbos. So many Jews, tens of thousands of Jews, couldn't pass the test, and they went to work on Shabbos. On Shabbos morning, they would make Kiddush, and from Kiddush, they would go to work. And it's hard, we can't judge those people, because we don't know what test they had, because if they didn't go to work, they would starve. There was no way of them not starving. But the reality is that they should have said, Torah says I'm not allowed to work on Shabbos. But there were those Jews who did sacrifice, who said, I'm not going to stop, I'm not going to work on Shabbos no matter what, and they starved, and they had terrible lives, physically, materially, they didn't succeed.
What about Yidden that, like, if they had to work on Shabbos in order to have Shabbos, in order to honor Shabbos?
That doesn't excuse it, but it's hard. We can't judge those people. We shouldn't be judgmental of people like that. But we know that what they did means that they didn't recognize that the reality of the world is what Torah says, not what the government says, not what the world says. But then there are people who had Mesiras Nefesh, and they said, "Yeah, I know this is the reality, but I'm going to keep Shabbos." There was a minority who kept it, and they deserve great credit. But there was still a conflict. Gimmel Tammuz tells us there's no conflict. Torah says that Shabbos is Shabbos. You know Shabbos is Shabbos. There's not even a question. You're not even going to be bothered by the fact that the so-called reality tells you that you can't live unless you break Shabbos. No, the Torah says it's Shabbos. There's a famous story, Rabbi Heschel Greenberg, who was the Rav in Maplewood, New Jersey, tells the story of a couple who had a daughter who was having a very hard time in finding a shidduch and finding a husband. And they came to the rabbi. The rabbi should help them. So the rabbi said, "Go to the Rebbe. This is our Rebbe." And they went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told them asked them what they did for a living, and they said they have a store in Newark, New Jersey, and that's how they supported themselves. And the Rebbe says, "Well, the store is. When do you keep the store open on Shabbos?" And they said, "Yes, we have no choice. We have to. The most business is done on Shabbos. That's when people go shopping." And the Rebbe said, "If you close the store on Shabbos, your daughter will find the shidduch. She'll get married." And they got very upset. They said, "The only reason we're open on Shabbos is for our daughter, to make money so we can support our daughter, so she could be able to get married and start a family." And they left the Rebbe's room, and they told Rabbi Gordon, "We were very upset with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He didn't help us at all. He told us we should close our store on Shabbos." And we told him, as soon as she gets engaged, we will close our store, because we don't need it anymore for ourselves. We need it only for her. And the Rebbe told him, "No, you have to do it the other way around. First you have to close the store, and then your daughter will become engaged." So what happened? So they were very upset. A few years, I don't know how many years later, there were riots. I remember the riots in Newark, New Jersey, where the rioters burned down half of the city, and one of the places they destroyed was the store. So the store closed not only for Shabbos, but for the whole week. A few weeks later, she got engaged. The Rebbe didn't see it as, you know what, Shabbos is so important. If you keep Shabbos, it's going to take away the reason why she's not getting married. It's a reward. The Rebbe didn't see it that way. The Rebbe saw Torah is reality. Everything else you're telling me is not reality. You're living in a dream world. And that, I think, is what Gimmel Tammuz, at least one of the very powerful lessons of Gimmel Tammuz, as Yaakov loy mes, Rebbe loy mes, the Rebbe is here, the Rebbe is very much alive. However you want to interpret it, I don't care how you interpret it, but the Rebbe is just as much alive now as the Rebbe was before Gimmel Tammuz, and actually much more so. Again, we're not happy with this manifestation of his life where we can't hear and see him, but the reality is, and we have to stick to reality, that the Rebbe is very much alive, and we have so many stories to tell. Anyone could tell you stories. There are tens of thousands of stories of people who have problems, and they write to the Rebbe, and they open the Rebbe's Igris, and people go to the Eihel, and they get answers, and they're helped in miraculous ways. There's a story I just shared not too long ago. I heard this from my Mechutin, Rabbi Beryl Mochkin, and from another source who didn't know of Rabbi Beryl Mochkin, so it's two different sources. I told the story not too long ago. There was this Jew who was not a Chassid, who was from the Lithuanian community. I believe he was from Baltimore, and he had a malignant tumor that was life-threatening, and the doctors told him that he must do surgery right away. But he was concerned about it, so he came to the Rebbe, even though he was not a chassid, and the Rebbe told him, do not do the surgery. And he listened. And he did not do the surgery. And Baruch Hashem, he didn't, nothing, he was all right for many years. Then after Gimmel Tammuz, years later, his malignancy returned. I don't know if it was the same place or a different place. And the doctors again said, you must do surgery. And this time he didn't know what to do, because the Rebbe told him not to do surgery. But that was then. Maybe now it's different. Just because the Rebbe, we know a lot of cases where the Rebbe told someone something once, years later the situation repeated itself and the Rebbe told him to, now it's different. Situations do change. The Rebbe doesn't change, situations change. So he didn't know what to do. So he went to the Ohel and he poured out his heart at the Ohel, and then after he finished davening, he went into the little room next to the Ohel where they play videos of the Rebbe from Farbrengens, from dollars, and he walks in there, and what does he see? He sees the Rebbe giving him $1 and telling him, don't do the surgery. That's what the Rebbe told him initially. And he didn't do the surgery, to his credit. I don't know how many Chassidim would have listened, but he was a real Chassid. And you see stories like this, the thousands of the Rebbe being so involved in our lives and performing miracles. So Gimmel Tammuz is not an end of an era, it's the beginning of an era. And at the same time, we cry out, Ad Mosai, we're not happy with this era. We want this era to end, to be able to see the Rebbe with our eyes of flesh, with our ears of flesh, and to hear his words, to hear Teirasa Shel Moshiach, L'chaim, L'chaim. I'm not taking any more. Shalom Aleichem. What's your name?
Leon from Miami.
Nice to meet you.
Came one day for a job, and I had to look for Farbrengen, and someone sent me the flyer. So
Okay, I'm glad you came.
thank you.
So nice.
I told the story from England, the guy from England. His name was Glick.
Yeah, I heard that, yeah. L'chaim. We have to alternate from one side to the other. On one hand, we're celebrating the fact that the Rebbe is real, and reality determines that we're on the threshold of Geula, as the Rebbe told us, and the Geula is imminent. And even though it looks, when you look around the world, you see the world is getting crazier and crazier, that's all symptoms of the fact that we're making this transition. And anytime there's a transition, there's always upheaval, because the world is bracing for some transformation that will be permanent. So we have to be not only positive but ecstatic that we're living in the best period of all of Jewish history, of all of human history. There's no time in history that was as great as the way we are today. I say that, I don't necessarily behave that way as if this is the best, the happiest time in history. It takes mashke to make me feel that way a little, or at least to say it. But that's the reality. You can't deny reality, and you have to conform to reality rather than having reality conform to your weakness. We all have weakness because we're products of Golus. Golus did a real job on us. Golus is the most depressing thing that you can think of, and we want to get out of this depressing thing. Now, Golus has all the treasures hidden in it and all the positive things, but in the final analysis, Golus is one of the three things that it says in the Gemara that Hashem regrets creating. He regrets Golus, which means that He wants us to regret Golus. He doesn't want us to feel comfortable in Golus. So on one hand, we can't bask in the fact that everything is great, and we can't wallow in the sadness that this is Golus. We have to constantly alternate. If it becomes too comfortable in Golus, we're in bad shape. If someone says, Golus is great because we have the Rebbe is here with us, and we have Gashmius, and we have Ruchnius, we have everything we want. So Golus is not as bad as we think it is. That's dangerous. Well, on the other hand, if you say, well, we don't have to worry about anything, we have Geula in front of us. The Rebbe told us those clear words. We have Geula in front of us. And right after that happened, the story with Mrs. Lapine occurred. So the fact that we have Geula in front of us doesn't mean we can't cry out Ad Mosai. there are people who like to go to extremes and forget about there's another side to everything. We have to be able to combine. As I said before, the Rebbe says we are able to combine opposites. On one hand, one side of our heart we're laughing, we're rejoicing. The other side of our heart we're crying, and we have to alternate from one to the other. But there's some people who are by teva, by nature, optimists. They're joyous, they're outgoing, they're extroverted. They have to sometimes be tempered by knowing that we're still in Golus. Unfortunately, most of us are products of Golus, so we have to focus more on the positive, not on the negative. The Ad Mosai has to be there, but we have to say Yechi HaMelech with greater fervor than the Ad Mosai. Not that the Ad Mosai is not needed. What's the difference? Ad Mosai is where we're saying we can't handle this. This is too bad for us. This is horrible for us. We can't see the Rebbe. We can't hear the Rebbe. The fact that we have all the blessings from the Rebbe and all the miracles, that's not good enough. But Yechi HaMelech means that we're living with the future. And there's a story that I'll tell you that I shared many times that happened with me. I like to tell stories about myself, like any other yesh, gasa ruach, and anyone else who likes to think about themselves. This is once I was flying on a JetBlue flight. Blue is tchelis. Tchelis is Gimmel Yam, Gimmel Rakia, Gimmel Kisei HaKavod. So I was close to the Kisei HaKavod, and as we're flying, I'm sitting in a seat, and I saw there was a better seat that had an empty seat next to it, so I sat down there, and there was a student from UB who was sitting near the window. I was in the aisle, and we strike up a combination when the plane was still on the ground. And he's a Jewish student, and I noticed this JetBlue has a little screen, and it said what our altitude was. We're on the ground, and it said our altitude was 613. So this was a perfect way of getting into a discussion about Yiddishkeit. So I said to him, you know what 613 is? He shrugs his shoulders. He didn't know what 613 was. So I said, those are the commandments in the Torah. So, it was a good opener to discuss Judaism. The plane takes off. It's shortly after the plane takes off, the pilot gets on and he says, we have a little problem with the wheels of the plane, so we're going to have to fly at a lower speed and a lower altitude. And it sounded like it was no big deal. The trip will just take an extra half hour. And while we're going, I noticed that the speed of the plane was 358. So I said to the guy, do you know what 358 is? He said, no. So that's the gematria, the numerical value of the word Moshiach. So we got into a discussion about Moshiach. As the plane is getting closer to New York, I see the flight attendants running down the aisle and then opening up a bin and taking something out and running back. And I have a rule that when something happens on the plane, you look at the flight attendants. If they're not nervous, don't get nervous. When they become nervous, then you become nervous. And I could see that they were nervous. So I knew that something was going on that wasn't so good. And that didn't take too long. The pilot gets on and he said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime situation. Because the wheels didn't come back into the plane, then we don't know how the plane is going to land. And we won't, he said, we don't know if the wheels did not come back in. We don't know if the wheels are straight or crooked. If they're crooked, it's a problem. This is the once-in-a-lifetime thing that can happen. That really comforted everyone. Once-in-a-lifetime thing. And he said, when we get closer to the airport, other planes will be able to tell us if the wheels are straight or crooked. So people are starting to get nervous. And then he gets on the loudspeaker and he says, well, we're closer to the airport and the wheels are crooked and we're going to have a crash landing. We have to prepare for a crash landing. So I'm sitting there, and when I hear that, I take out a Tillim to start to say Tillim. That's what a Jew is supposed to do. And meanwhile, I turn to the student who's sitting there, and I see tears streaming down his face. He's crying. thinking that this is going to be his end. And he told me later on that I couldn't see the other people on the other side, but he can see them. He said people were crying because this they knew was the end. And when he started crying, I started saying to him, I started singing a joyous tune. Yechi Adonenu Mereinu V'Rabbeinu Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'ad. May Mashiach live forever and ever. And I started gesturing with my hands like this. That's not my nature. I'm not that type of person. But here I felt like I had to do that. And I told him, when life is over, you say Shema. When life begins, a new life, you say Yechi. Yechi means let there be life. And sure enough, they told us to put our hands, when the plane lands, we should bow down, bend down, and put our hands on our neck like this, which we all did. We followed the instructions, and the plane landed, and there were only 2 explosions. The engine, the pilot was very skilled, and he kept the plane on its hind wheels for as long as he could, because it were the front wheels that were the problem. And when they finally landed, boom, there was an explosion, and they put it out right away, and we got off the plane, everyone was safe. I met this a year later. I'm in Seagate Yeshiva, which doesn't exist anymore, but then it existed. And someone comes over to me after a Farbrengen and he says, "Do you recognize me?" I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "I was the student who was sitting in that plane, and because of your singing the joyous song, your trust, I was scared." But I knew that if I'm just going to show that I'm just as frightened as he is, that would not be a good thing. So I had to show that I'm joyous. And then the second point is that if it's time to go, it's better to go with a song than to go with crying. So that turned him into, he became a Baal Tshuva. He became totally frum to this day. So what is the story about? The story is about that, yes, there are times when we have to cry and say Ad Mosai, but the better approach is to laugh and rejoice and to say Yechi. To be optimistic with Bitachon, with true trust, as time progresses and we're still in Golus, and it's very easy to become depressed. The Rebbe wants us to overcome that, to recognize reality is reality. The Rebbe is reality, and the Rebbe says the Geula is imminent, and it's imminent. And that's the Avodah, that's the service of Yidden today, to overcome the natural tendency to be depressed and to see Golus as reality. We have to see Golus as the camouflage, the concealment of reality, and reality is what the Rebbe says. L'chaim, l'chaim. Chi Adonenu, Mereinu V'Rabbeinu, Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'ad. Chi Adonenu, Mereinu V'Rabbeinu, Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'ad. Moshiach, Le'olam V'ad. Yechi Adonenu, Mereinu V'Rabbeinu, Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'ad. Yechi Adonenu, Mereinu V'Rabbeinu, Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'ad. Yechi Adonenu, Mereinu V'Rabbeinu, Moshiach Le'olam V'ad. Yechi Adonenu, Mereinu V'Rabbeinu, Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'ad. What? Mereinu V'Rabbeinu, Melech HaMashiach Le'olam V'ad. Yechi Melech HaMoshiach L'chaim. You have to give equal time. We're talking about two different sides of the equation over here. Gimmel Tammuz on one hand is a joyous time. It's the beginning of Geula. It's the sun didn't set. It's all positive. It's the Rebbe is still with us, and he's taking us out of Golus imminently. At the same time, we have to cry out Ad Mosai. So let's give a little bit of. I've focused mostly on the positive. Let's talk about the Ad Mosai. There's a story of Rav Wolf Kitzis, one of the leading disciples of the Baal Shem Tov, who's buried near the Baal Shem Tov in Mezhebush. Rav Wolf Kitzis had a tremendous desire, a passion to go to Eretz Yisrael. And the Baal Shem Tov said no many times. There was one time where the Baal Shem Tov says, okay, if you want to go, you can go. But before you go, I want to give you a message. And he told him that before you answer a question that anyone will ask you, think before you answer. Well, not a big task, not a big challenge to answer a question and to think before you answer a question. So he was very happy, and he goes on the ship, and the ship stops off at an island everyone disembarked, and he went to the forest to daven mincha. And he expected after mincha he would go back on the ship. He davens mincha, and as a great tzaddik that he was, his mincha took longer than he expected. And when he finally finished mincha and he goes to the shore and he sees the ship had already left. So he's stuck on this island. He has to wait for the next ship. But he needs a place to stay. He's abandoned in a deserted island. So he travels, walks through the island, and he sees a house in the distance, and he says, wow, there's a house here. And he goes to the house. He's a mezuzah on the door. And he walks in, he knocks on the door. An old, venerable-looking man with a long beard, a white beard, says, come in, please. And he treats him to everything he needed, and he started talking to him about Torah. And apparently this was a religious Jew, a scholar who was a righteous, pious Jew who was somehow living on this deserted island. And then, before the new ship was going to arrive, he says to Rabbi Wolf Kitzis, where are you from? You're from Russia, Ukraine. How is the plight of the Jews there? And he said, Baruch Hashem, thank God, we're all right, we're surviving, we're doing fine, we're doing okay, God takes care of us. And then, after he finished saying that, and he realized he made a big blunder. The Baal Shem Tov told him that before he answers a question, he should think. And he just answered the question impulsively, the way he thought without thinking. And he took the next ship that went back to Mezhebush, to Europe, which took him eventually to his hometown. And he went to the Baal Shem Tov and he says, I knew I blew it. What did I do wrong? And the Baal Shem Tov said, that Jew was Avraham Avinu, was Avraham, our father, our patriarch. And he's constantly arguing with God and saying, God, your children are suffering, my children are suffering terribly, do something for them, bring them Moshiach. And God says, they're doing okay, no big deal. And Avraham says, no, they're not doing okay. So God says, well, why don't you ask one of their members how they're doing? And that's what I did. I asked you how the Jews are doing. You said, fine, everything is fine and dandy. you messed up big time. So on one hand, we're supposed to say everything is great, wonderful. At the same time, we're supposed to say, no, things are not fine and dandy. We just have to know the balance. The balancing is, what is the challenge of life? The challenge of life is not to do good or not to do evil. It's the balance, when you're supposed to focus on A and when you're supposed to focus on B, and when you're supposed to put more effort on one than the other. Sometimes when life gets so comfortable, and God gives us certain challenges. Why does God give us certain challenges at a certain time and not at another time? When we get too comfortable with Golus, God says, no, Golus is not so great. Start saying Ad Mosai. When things get better, we stop saying Ad Mosai. God says, no, things are not yet better. But when we become depressed, God says, no, never fall into depression. That's Golus on steroids. Depression is worse than the way you were before. Recognize that the Rebbe is still with us. And again, there's so many stories we can tell. So many ways that the Rebbe has shown us that he's with us. Just share a story. I mean, I could share many stories. I'll share a few of them. I had a woman who was at my Shabbos table, a couple, an older couple in their 80s. And I was talking about how the Rebbe answers our questions through the Rebbe's letters, through the Igros. What do? We have a question, a real pressing question. We open up randomly, we take one of the volumes of the Rebbe's letters, and there are so many volumes. And right now there are a total, if you take Hebrew and English, way over 40 volumes. And you take a random volume and you open it up randomly. You give some tzedakah, you make a resolution to do something better, because that gives you a keli, a receptacle to the Rebbe's blessing, and you open it up and you find an answer to your question. Does it always work? No. Why doesn't it work always? So there could be a few reasons. Number one, it could be your question is so ridiculous that you should have figured out the answer by yourself by now, based on what you know is right. Number two, it's because you're not a vessel. You didn't prepare yourself properly. And number three, the Rebbe is expecting you to work it out on your own. But in spite of that, in so many thousands upon thousands of times, the Rebbe answers directly. So anyhow, I was telling the people about how this works. I told them different stories. So this woman said, can I try it? I said, be my guest. So right behind her was the bookcase, you know, my house. And there was a set of letters in English. She took out one volume and she opened it up randomly. She reads it and she says, it doesn't answer my question. I said, could you tell me what your question was? It was about her grandchild who was in college and having problems. I said, did you read the whole page? The second half of the letter of the page was about someone who had a grandchild in college and had problems. It was a direct answer to her question. That's just one of many hundreds of stories. Another story I told many times just this week, I told a story. Zev Goldenberg. Some of you remember him? Who remembers Zev Goldenberg? Remember him, Benny? What? Zev Goldenberg comes to Buffalo. He was not a card-carrying Lubavitcher Chassid. And he had at that time I think he had one child. And he was planning to become a physical therapist. And he applied to Damon College. That's a private college. And he, by the way, the president of Damon College was once surfing the I don't know if it was the internet those days, but his cable television. In the middle of the night, he sees a white bearded rabbi talking, and he started to watch it for hours. He was mesmerized. He was a Catholic, but it was the Rebbe speaking on cable television. He couldn't take his eyes off. He was glued to it. But anyhow, that's besides the point. Anyhow, he got into Damon College, and after a few days or weeks, he dropped out. He didn't like the program, and he applied to UB. And they said, it's too late, but if he applies again next year, they'll let him in. So he comes to me and he says to me, I have a problem. I have a wife and a child I have to support. If I have to wait another year and then 3 years of physical therapy training, I don't know if I can do that. But I heard that you Chassidim have a custom that when you have a question, you ask the Rebbe by using his letters. And could I do it? I said, be my guest. So he goes over to I told him where my bookcase was. I had a bookcase with all the Rebbe's Svarim. And he takes out a volume randomly. He brings it to me. He opens it up randomly. And I read, it was a letter that someone wrote, the Rebbe wrote to someone about using physical therapy, how it's a very good way of treating that problem. And later on I checked, there was no other letter in the 11,000 letters that were published to that point where the Rebbe spoke about the virtues of physical therapy. So I told him, obviously the Rebbe gave you an answer. You should apply. So fast forward a year, he applies to get into UB and he gets in. And I meet him a few days before the semester was to begin, and I asked him, how are you getting ready for the new semester to go into the school for physical therapy? He says, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing physical therapy. Why? He said, because meantime I had to get a job. I got a job as a salesman for high-tech medical equipment, and I'm doing very well, making a very good living, so I'm not going to go to the physical therapy. So I remember telling him, I think the Rebbe wants you to become a physical therapist. And that was it. I'm not going to impose myself on him. I meet him a week later, and I asked him, how are things going? He says, well, I'm in the physical therapy department. I said, what happened? He said, the day before the semester was to begin, he was laid off from his job as a salesperson. So we saw this, how the Rebbe was guiding him and effectively preparing him for his future. And he's today in Baltimore, Zev Goldenberg, and he's a successful physical therapist. My brother, Yosef Yitzchak, has an incredible story. It's a Baal Shemska story. When his wife was in a terrible accident where she was the driver of the car, Rabbi Munitz's brother-in-law, Fitzi Lipska, was killed, and my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, was in a coma for 7 weeks, and the doctors didn't know if she would come out alive or not. So he wrote, there was at one point in the middle of the 7 weeks where she had a slight improvement. So my brother wrote to the Rebbe as follows: I want to notify the Rebbe that my wife had a slight improvement, and I want to ask for a bracha for the future, that she should be more improvement, and what should I do as a keli, as a vessel for a greater improvement. And then he said something which was unusual. As a woman is in a coma, we don't even know if she's going to ever wake up. And he said that when she comes home, her bedroom was upstairs. Should she walk upstairs or not? Or should we, in other words, get her a bedroom on the lower floor? And then he wrote that she loves to have guests. Should we invite guests to the home? These were the questions he asked the Rebbe, and he opened up the Igros Kodesh randomly. And the Rebbe, what he opened up was a letter to someone. The Rebbe thanks him for telling me that your condition improved, or someone's condition improved, and the vessel for further improvement is Bitachon, is trust in Hashem. And the question you asked about going up the stairs, you should consult with a doctor. And about inviting a guest, you should invite the guests. So he got an answer to all those 4 questions, which is mind-boggling. My brother-in-law, blessed memory, Mendel Lipkovsky, had a gathering of Farbrengen in which he spoke about the Rebbe's letters, and there was one skeptic there who didn't believe in it. And my brother-in-law asked the people there to ask their questions. I don't remember how many people there were, but there were 4 or 5 people who asked their question. And they opened up the Igros Kodesh randomly, and it was an answer to each one of those 4 people. These are just some of the incredible stories. I once had an incident. Well, I'll tell you another story. I was traveling to Australia for a wedding, and I knew that they were going to ask me to speak in the main Chabad shul called Ol Yosef Yitzchak Lubavitch. Because I was a shliach in Australia as a bacher for 2 years, And I came back a few times, so I knew that from the past that they would invite me to speak. So I felt that since I'm coming all the way from this part of the world to that part of the world, that I have a special mission to speak about something that the Rebbe would want me to speak about. So I felt I should ask the Rebbe what I should talk about on Shabbos. So I had a pocket PC that had 24 volumes of the Rebbe's letters in it. And it had a button that was for random letter. You push the button, you got a random letter. So I pushed the button, and I got a random letter. It was addressed to the yeshiva, the synagogue of the yeshiva Allah Yosef Yitzchak Lubavitch in Melbourne, Australia. And it was the only letter. There were a few letters like that, but the other letters were about administrative things, about the school. This was a letter to the shul, and the Rebbe says, I want to impart my message that I gave this past Shabbos. So here I'm asking the Rebbe for a message to that shul, and the Rebbe gives me a direct answer to that shul, and the message was that we are at the end of exile, and a mitzvah is credited to the one who finishes it. We are the makeh b'patish. In Shabbos, one of the 39 forms of labor is where you finish the work of whatever it is making something, and you complete it. The last force of the hammer is one of the labors that completes something. We are the makeh b'patish. We are the ones who are going to complete the end. We're going to bring an end to the golus and bring about the geula shlema, the complete redemption. So here I got a direct answer about one more story, the personal story. This is, I don't remember how many years ago, probably 20 years ago, I had a herniated disc. A herniated disc is in the back, but it doesn't affect the back, it affects my legs. Am I right? I don't have to ask if I'm right, because I felt it. That I couldn't walk without tremendous pain. And this lasted for 3/4 of a year. I tried that injection. What do you call that? Women in labor get what? Epidural. And epidural only worked to give me an additional pain. It didn't take away the original pain, but it gave me an additional pain. Nothing worked. Physical therapy even didn't work. And the Shavuos is coming, and Shavuos, there's a patalucha. Everyone who's able to go would walk to Borough Park. In those days, people would predominantly go to Borough Park, which is about 3 or 4 miles. And in Borough Park, they would go to the various shuls, and they would speak, and they would walk back. And this was considered to be very, very important. So much so that the Rebbe once said that if people don't abide by his instruction about not drinking more than the amount that he said you should, I don't want you to go on this walk, because this is my project, and I don't want you to go on my project when you don't follow what I tell you. So this I felt was the greatest way of connecting to the Rebbe. And here I'm a cripple. You can't say it about someone else, but you can say it about yourself. I'm a cripple, and there's no way that I'm going to walk 4 miles here, 4 miles there, and in Borough Park another mile or 2, when I can't even walk a block without tremendous pain. So I felt very guilty about it. Am I going to go to Borough Park, to New York, to be by the Rebbe and not go on the Talucha? But in the end, I decided I'll go anyhow. And now Shavuos was Sunday and Monday, so there was a 3-day holiday, Shabbos, Sunday, and Monday. Friday night, I come to 770, and they always had different publications of Torah teachings, stories, whatever it is. So the first thing I picked up was a miracle story. Someone had a problem with their leg, and they asked the Rebbe in the Rebbe's letters about their leg because they couldn't go on that taluch, on that walk to Borough Park, and they wanted to know what they can do. And the Rebbe they opened up the Igros, and the Rebbe gave them a bracha. So I said, isn't this interesting? The first thing I see when I come to 770 is about someone who had a problem with his walking, and he's worried about going on this walk to Borough Park. So I thought to myself, you know what? Tomorrow when they go on this walk, I'll try. If I could do it, I'll do it. If I can't, I can't. The Rebbe won't be upset if I can't do it. Next day, I walked to 770, very painful. I walked back to where I was staying. It was very painful. So I decided, you know what I'm going to do? When the Talucha, when the passes by where I was staying, I'll join them. If I feel pain after a block, I'll go back. Otherwise, I'll continue. I go on the Talucha. Up until that point, I felt pain wherever I walked. I go on the Talucha on this walk, and the pain disappears. I don't feel any pain. So I walk a block, and I don't feel any pain, zero. I say, you know why I don't feel pain? Because I'm distracted. I'm so excited about going on this walk. Everyone is so upbeat. I don't feel pain because I'm distracted. So I stopped and concentrated on my pain to feel the pain. And I don't feel any pain. I walk 4 miles to Borough Park, another mile or 2 in Borough Park. I walk back 4 miles. The last block, the pain returned. And I have a whole theory why the pain had to return. 2 weeks later, the pain disappeared forever. Baruch Hashem. So these are just personal stories, and I have many more, but I'm not going to go to tell all the stories now. But there are so many thousands of people who can tell you these stories of the Rebbe being here for us. But in spite of that, again, we're not satisfied, we're not happy. We want to see the final Geula Shlema, to get out of this Golus. And if we don't feel pain in Golus, that itself is a symptom of Golus. The Baal Shem Tov once translated, it says in Chumash Devarim, Parshas Vayelech, V'anochi haster aster, I will conceal myself. Why twice? V'anochi haster spanai, I will conceal my face. So the Baal Shem Tov said, the worst part of Golus is that the fact that God is concealed, that itself is concealed. We don't even feel that. That doesn't even bother us. You go to a shul of Orthodox Jews, any place in the world, and you ask them, are you bothered by the fact that God is concealed? And it doesn't have to be a shul someplace else. It's our own shul. It's myself. Are we so bothered that the God is concealed? And the answer to most people is no, we're not so bothered. That itself is a symptom of Golus. And that's what Gimmel Tammuz has to help us appreciate the fact that we can't ever be satisfied with God's concealment. Maybe it should help that we should wake up from Golus and demand an end to the Golus and be reunited with the Rebbe once and for all. Take it from Yad Mamish. L'chaim. Moshiach now, we don't want to wait, okay? Thank for being here. Amen. We want Moshiach now, we don't want to wait. Ay, 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 da, 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 da. We have to wait, we want Moshiach now, we don't want to wait. Mosai, we don't want to wait, we want Moshiach now, we don't want to wait. Mosai, do we have to wait? We want Moshiach now, we don't want to wait. Mosai, do we have to wait? We want Moshiach now, we don't want to wait. Ad Mosai, do we have to wait? We want Moshiach now, we don't want to wait. Ad Mosai, do we have to wait? We want Moshiach now, we don't want to wait. Mosai, do we have to wait? We want Moshiach now, we don't want to wait. Mosai is by connecting to the Rebbe, to the teachings of the Rebbe, following Shulchan Aruch. And every mitzvah we do, we have to recognize it's not just doing a good thing, we're connecting to reality. Anytime we do anything else, whatever we do, if it's not connected to serving God, it's not reality, it's fake. We're living in an age of not reality, virtual reality. And we're getting worse and more into that virtual reality with AI. Nothing is true. You want a speech? Just ask AI for a speech. You want whatever you want. You don't have to do anything anymore. It's all fake. And there's the story of, I'll just conclude with the story of the Rebbe. One of my colleagues, Rabbi Zalman Chanin, who was in charge of publishing the Rebbe's talks, was aware of the fact that the Rebbe would open up thousands and thousands of envelopes every week. Because the Rebbe got hundreds, I think at one point he got about 1,000 letters a day. But whatever it was certainly in the hundreds. He got sacks of mail every day. And the Rebbe did not allow his secretaries to open up his mail. He would open up every letter individually. And when you open up letters, you get cuts with your fingers. It takes time. And the Rebbe's time was very precious. So Zalman Chanin, I think it was in Israel, he found a machine that opens up letters. Actually, I want to tell you another story, but I'll tell you this story before I tell the other one. And so he bought that machine and he gave it to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe says, I can't use it. It's too noisy. So he got him another machine that was quiet. And the Rebbe again didn't want it. So the Rebbe explained to him why he won't use that machine to open up letters. He said that people seal their envelopes. People that write to the Rebbe mostly write about their suffering, their pain, their problems. And many people, when they seal their letters, seal it with tears. I don't know if the Rebbe meant literally or figuratively or both. He says, how can I open up an envelope that someone sealed with his tears with a machine? So the Rebbe wanted to open the letters to feel the tears of every person who wrote to him, thousands and thousands of people. But that leads me to the other story that the Rebbe would sign hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of letters. I know my father, every Rosh Hashanah would get a letter from the Rebbe. There was a form letter that everyone got the same letter, and the Rebbe would sign. And every time you had a bar mitzvah, the Rebbe would send you a letter, and there were hundreds, if not thousands, of bar mitzvahs, and the same thing with weddings and other occasions. So someone decided, why should the Rebbe have to sign every letter? You can get him a stamp that has his signature on it, which is what, when you get a letter from the president, it's not his signature, he didn't sign it, it's a fabricated signature. So the Rebbe rejected that. And even though the Rebbe was so intent on not wasting a second, the Rebbe's time was so precious, the Rebbe says, there's only one thing left in this world that's true. That's your signature. Do I want to fabricate that as well? So we want to be a little bit of emes. We connect to the Rebbe. And how do you connect to the Rebbe? Just by saying, I want to be connected to the Rebbe, that doesn't connect you. It's by following the Rebbe's instructions and learning his teachings, of course, and in general, dedicating our lives to Torah and Mitzvot, which is objectively ultimate truth. And that's how we get out of Golus, which is, by definition, an illusion. Hayinu kecholmin, it says, we're like in a dream. It's not real. How do you get out of this dream? Through Torah and Mitzvah. So every time we do a mitzvah, we shouldn't just think, I just did the right thing. That's not enough. You connected to reality, and that leads to the ultimate reality. L'chaim, l'chaim. Another niggin, and we'll call it a night.
Did you hack the niggun already?
What?
Hack the niggun you did?
Not yet. It's Hakel, the year of gathering, so this is the niggin for Hakel. Yeshuva Heina. Ay, 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 Kol Gadol, Kol Gadol, Kol Gadol, Yeshuva Heina. Okay, I reminded myself what I wanted to say. There's a Medrash Pliya, a very puzzling Medrash on this parsha of Korach, which connects to Chukas. Gimmel Tammuz is the bridge between Korach and Chukas. The Medrash says, Ma ra Korach. What did Korach see that caused him to rebel against Moshe? And the Medrash answers, Parshas Para Aduma, the story of the red cow that is used to purify someone who comes in contact with the dead. What is the connection? So one way of explaining it is, what is the reason for bringing the Para Aduma? It's an atonement for the egel, for the golden calf. What happened with the golden calf? Moshe was demoted. Moshe was demoted from his high exalted position. Vayered Moshe min ahar. He went down from the mountain. So Korach said, you know what? Moshe may have been a big shot before the egel, and I would have listened to him. But now that he's in need of an atonement, he's no big shot anymore. I can argue with him. I can counter him. What was Korach's mistake? Korach's mistake was that Moshe was not demoted. We were demoted. And we couldn't see Moshe's greatness anymore, the way we saw it before. And this reminds us of the story, I think it was Rabbi Masmid, famous Chassid, very holy Jew in his own right, who was a Holocaust victim and martyr. So the previous Rebbe, who was very strong in his youth, and his later years even, until he was arrested, and even after he got out of prison, he was still very strong. And then his condition, his physical condition deteriorated, and it affected his speech mostly. It was hard to understand the previous Rebbe. So Rabbi Shemasman would say, look how fagrep, look how coarse we have become. We're so coarse that we can't even understand the Rebbe's speech. So even though it was the Rebbe's infirmity, the Rebbe's handicap, that he had suffered from MS, which paralyzed him and caused him to not be able to speak clearly, Rabbi Shemasman saw the reality that when a Rebbe, when a tzaddik like that is no longer able to communicate, it's not that he is going down a level, it's we are going down a level. And that's the lesson of Gimmel Tammuz, that the fact that we can't see the Rebbe is not that the Rebbe is beyond us. The Rebbe is not beyond us. It's we are distanced from the Rebbe because we're still in our Golus Pnimi, in our internal Golus. And the minute we get out of our internal Golus, we'll realize that the Rebbe was always here, and the Rebbe is guiding us, and the Rebbe is taking us out of Golus, ultimately take it from Miyad Mamish. We should all have a good summer, It should be a healthy summer, and good health means that we're with Moshiach, Eretz Yisrael, and Beit HaMikdash Shlishi. L'chaim, l'chaim. Everyone should make a bracha achrona. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam baruch atah Elohim. Thanks for coming.
Steve has the baby.
What was his name again?